but I mean PDF. Um, and it's going to talk to you about flexibility. Um, Flexibility is an interesting concept, right? Because one of the problems we always run into when we're trying to recommend policy, implement policy, draft policy, is that it's impossible for us to know every single circumstance that this policy is going to apply to. So oftentimes what ends up happening is you write a constitution as vaguely and openly as possible, with the caveat that there are certain things you want to make sure you forbid and you want to keep it inside some sort of guardrails. And then you write legislation a little bit narrower still. You make the laws. The statutes should be more specific than the Constitution, but they can't color inside absolutely everything. There's a limit to every possibility you can imagine from the seats of the legislature. So they kick down regulatory authority to the executive branch and experts who work for government, who actually are supposed to have public meetings and try to come up with regulation that can fit kind of just about any scenario you need. But inevitably, something comes up you didn't think of. Some scenario comes up that, this regulation or a statute or whatever policy wasn't really designed to address properly. And the more rigid you make it, the more onerous that's going to be in those kinds of situations. The more trouble it's going to cause, the more difficult it'll make it to do anything. And ultimately, maybe entire projects, economic activity, all sorts of things get halted due to inflexible policy. So you want to try to build flexibility in or design flexibility in when you recommend policies, but not so much that there are these wide gaping loopholes that the policy essentially has no teeth, right? And so it's a very delicate balancing act. I want to tell you an example of what not to do that I've done in the past. So call this an episode of Don't Do What Professor Carrick Did. But I did it meaning well, and I think by the end you'll see why I did it, and also why I probably wouldn't do it if I could go back and do it all over again. So if you flash back to the year, it was probably 2010. There was an Obama era program that came out of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 called the Energy Efficient Appliance Rebate Program. And I was the person in the state of Rhode Island tasked with running this program, right? With setting it up, with designing it, with hiring or contracting a company to run it. And then my name was literally on every flyer that every salesman from Wickford Appliance to Home Depot to Lowe's to everywhere else that sold appliances in Rhode Island put out there, and my phone number, which also I would not recommend unless you enjoy getting 300 emails an hour from people who want to know if they can get a rebate for replacing their toilet they installed in 1972. The answer is no, but that's my brief attempt at humor in one of these short videos. So anyway, getting back to it, one of the things we had to do was pick a vendor, right? Like, all right, if we have to send out a rebate check to everyone, we need to set up rules for what would apply and what wouldn't apply. And there were some rules we set up that I'm okay with. We had to have a cutoff size for fridges because we didn't want people getting a $300 rebate for buying a $300 mini fridge, right? That kind of defeats the purpose. We wanted them replacing kind of home fridges. So we set it up. I forget if it was 16 or 18 cubic feet. It was one of those two numbers. We kind of went back and forth. And, basically the size that like a small one in a small apartment, but that would be your whole home fridge might be. And then anything smaller, we said, no, you can't get the rebate for replacing that. We set up rebates for, other appliances too that were high efficiency that you could replace. But obviously we didn't have the staff in the state to have people licking envelopes and stamps and mailing every one of these out and checking to make sure that every one of them was actually a model on the Energy Star list before we, mail it out and, getting all the info from all the stores. So we put an RFP out there, and we got several responses back, but one of them was interesting. And it's the one we ultimately ended up choosing, in that they said, look, We're not going to send checks out. What we would like to do instead is send Visa gift cards out. These Visa gift cards will have no fees, zero fees. They'll be the full amount of the rebate. And because we have this partnership with Visa, we can issue you, I don't know, 2,000 more rebates or something like that, right? Because Visa actually makes money off the store owners when they process the transaction. So instead of giving out points or anything like that, they're offering kind of like cash back into the state program so that we can offer more rebates than we otherwise could. When we sat around weighing everything, that sounded like a pretty good thing. We can hand out a few more rebates than we otherwise could around the state. They're doing it for the best price. They say they'll turn it around pretty fast. Other states looked like they had picked them recently. We were all kind of doing it at the same time, but I think Minnesota or someone like that picked them. So, we looked around and we said, yeah, this company seems like they're on the up and up, and they've had experience in this stuff before, and this seems like it's the way to get the most bang for our buck, so we'll sign them up. Well, we picked that company, and they do what they said they were going to do. There was nothing really wrong with the contract, but here's the rub: there was no flexibility. So for people who really did not want that Visa card for one reason or another, we had nothing for them. And believe it or not, there were multiple people who called me or showed up screaming for hours and hours and hours that they were told they would get a rebate, that a rebate meant a check or cash, that it did not mean this card, that they don't know what to do with the card, that they never had a card in their life. And they did not want to hear you can just use it for groceries or gas or like whatever you normally got to buy, and you just swipe it like normal, especially some older folks who had never had a credit card. And this was, 16, 17 years ago, so there were, I think, a few more of those around. They didn't want to hear it. They thought that they had been robbed of something. They did not think they were getting a card with money on it and not a check. And they were very, very, very unhappy to the point where it, actually caused a lot of people to flip out, to call constituent affairs, to call their reps, to, like I said, actually protest it. And could I have done it all over again? I just would have tried to go for the check or something else. It didn't even occur to me that there would be people that were this angry about receiving a Visa gift card instead of a check. And it didn't occur to, I don't think, anyone else on the technical committee. But there were all folks really, really worked up. Some folks literally in tears saying, they were counting on this to, buy their medicine that month. And they didn't want to hear anything about they could use it at CVS. They were very, very, very legitimately upset. And so, boy, if we could have had some flex to just like in those specific cases issue a check, it would have been great. But the way we set it up, we signed the contract, and the contract was signed with Visa, and there was no way to do it. And so short of pulling money out of my own pocket, there was nothing I could do for anyone. And it's one of those cases where like you wouldn't think you'd need that level of flexibility, but boy, if you can build it in, it saves you a ton of headache and time on the backside of complaints and people being irate and upset. So the lessons I learned as a young administrator, I suppose, and it may not be like the most serious lesson, right? It's a little bit funny actually when you drill down into it, but it's not funny at the same time. And I think it's a good lesson in flexibility. So I just wanted to give you a little real world one where, a little humility can go a long way, and trying to put yourself in everyone's shoes can go a long way. Not just dot the I's and cross the T's for the sake of disability compliance or something, but really stepping back and thinking about like, well, there might be a ramp here, but is it too steep to actually be workable? Is that curb cutout actually workable? Can a 90-year-old actually use this kind of digital currency, right? Like stopping back and thinking about, what makes sense for everyone. I think it's not just an ethical thing and a equity and inclusion thing, but it's an important flexibility thing. And so, you want to ask all these questions when you're thinking about flexibility. And I hope that this week you get to do a little bit of that as you move along in your projects. And I will see you next week.